Good evening and live from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. This is Dr. John Stamey, and I want to welcome everyone to ScaryCast. We've got a really great show tonight. A gentleman that's been on with us before, and he's a lot of fun. He has a lot of experience in the ScaryCast world. I'll tell you that. First of all, I would like to introduce my co host, the Dean of ScaryCast, Dr. Trey Dunaway. How are you doing tonight, Dr. Trey?
Good evening, John. Nice to be back with y'all. We've kind of had spotty productions for a few weeks, and I'm glad we're back.
Right, and we had a hurricane, and and that kept me from
Yep,
doing a podcast. But anyway,
yep.
we're glad the weather is clear and everything is good. So tonight from Hanover, Virginia, which is about 15 minutes north of Richmond, Virginia, we've got Steve Dills, who is the proprietor and director of the Hanover Tavern, a haunted place it is. Hey, Steve, how you doing tonight?
I'm good. How are you guys?
We're really glad you're here. Tell us now, you started talking to us and I said, stop. That's exactly what I want you to say on the show. So tell everybody a little bit about the Hanover Tavern as you were describing it to us.
Yeah, so the tavern just to I guess iterate a little bit. I was the president for the last 3 years, and I am currently retired. I'm one of the officers now, but the Hanover Tavern is owned and operated by the Hanover Tavern Foundation, and we were founded in 1990. And we, as the collective, there's about 30 of us, but the foundation owns and operates the tavern. The Hanover Tavern, excuse me, there we go. The Hanover Tavern actually dates back to around 1733. And we know that because we actually have some insurance documentation that shows that the building, was there in 1733, as well as the first uh, waiver or right to own and operate a tavern on the property. So now the Hanover Tavern that you see today is not that original building. The original building was a small one-story structure. It was very small, and it ran for about 100 years by all intents and purposes, just shy of 100 years. And at that point, I guess the family decided, you know what, it's time that we expand, right? Because taverns at that time were more often than not just taverns, but also the owner's home. So the tavern owner and their family lived in the same building that all of these strangers that were traveling down the stagecoach road were also staying at. So you're sharing your home with a bunch of your new favorite friends, right? And so in gosh 17, I want to say 1791 or so, they decided that they were going to build a home in to move into, and that was a big two-story structure. And then once that was built and completed in 1821, they built the new tavern. And these two buildings stood side by side. They were right next to each other. And in 1831, they decided to connect the building. And so that's what you actually see today. If you were to come to the tavern, the earliest portion of the building dates back to 1791. Um, and then the newer, dates back to 1821, connected in the 1830s. And then there was, some changes here and there all throughout the years, including, recently. And by recently, I mean like 1990 or so. So the tavern I call it a Frankenstein building, right? Because it was actually two separate buildings that in time were finally connected to become one. And it's awesome. It's one of the oldest continuously operating taverns in America. Um, we've got a full restaurant and bar there. We've got a theater that can sit about 155 people, and it's kind of in the round. You can kind of sit on three different sides of the theater to watch, a performance. And the folks that came in, well, let me backtrack a little bit. Not only do we have the theater, but we also have a full, immersive kind of museum upstairs that you can walk through. You can, immerse yourself and get into what this original tavern would have looked like at that time period. On top of that, we've got facilities. So we've got an entire what we call a coach house out back. that can, seat and host big events, big parties, weddings, you name it. We've probably had it in there. And so we try to be, kind of like the center of the community. Um, Now, in the 1950s, the building was purchased by a traveling troupe of actors that came down from New York. They were looking for a place to open up the very first dinner and a show ever. As they were traveling down, they passed an old, almost pretty much abandoned, but old, rundown building, massive building on the side of the road, and they decided that's where we want to fix this up, and this is where we're gonna host these shows, and that was the tavern. It had gone through its phases, and over time, it was a tavern. It was handed down and down and down and down, changed hands a number of times, and then they tried to reiterate and I guess rejuvenate the building. They turned it into a boutique hotel at one point. They turned it into apartments at one point. And then when they purchased it in the 1950s, it was on its last leg. And so the Barksdale Theater Troupe really were some of the first folks that ever really saved the tavern. If they didn't come down and do what they did and really put some life into that building, there would be no tavern today. And so they operated there for 40 years or so. And in 1990, they decided, you know what, this is a lot of work. We need to figure out another way that this tavern can survive into the future. And so the Hanover Tavern Foundation was founded, and we purchased the building and immediately dropped. Gosh, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it was a couple $1 million into it, just to renovate it and make it safe for folks to come back in and be able to enjoy the building. One of the really cool things that I always love to share is the Barksdale Theater Troupe are still around today, and they still perform at the tavern. It's renamed and rebranded a few times. They merged with a number of different theater troupes in the area, but today it's known as the Virginia Repertory Theater, and they still host 3 to 4 plays a year in the place that they were founded in the 1950s. So it has got a huge breadth of history, all the way back to the Civil War, all the way back to Patrick Henry, George Washington, and all of these things. It has been a part of Virginia history for a very long time. And so it has been an absolute honor and just a blast to be a steward and to be able to continue to share that building and its history with everybody. So it is a great place. I love it. It is active. We get a lot of activity in there when we investigate. A lot of it is tied to the historical uh, events that took place there, as well as the folks that were there, which is really fun. A lot of fun to be able to kind of, I guess, uncover that little layer of history that otherwise would be lost to time. So it's a great place.
Right. Now I've got a question. I've got a question that just popped into my head because I do run UFO conferences. And not only do I check out for ghosts, not only do I check out for cryptids, but have you ever had any UFO sightings in and around the tavern?
I'm not too sure. We have a not a lot, but a chunk of light pollution because Richmond is only, 15, 20 minutes down the road from us. Um, and so even at night, being in Virginia, a lot of folks think that it's somewhat unpopulated, but it's pretty populated around this area. And so the night sky is often filled with a lot of planes because we've got the Richmond International Airport, like literally again, probably 20 minutes away. Um, there's also a municipal airport that's right here. So actually two. So we get a lot of activity in the sky, and sometimes it's kind of hard to determine what's what. We haven't had, and that'd be kind of fun. We haven't had like a UFO stakeout or anything at the tavern. That could be kind of a fun evening to just go hang out and eat
Well,
burgers and hang out outside. So I might have to do
I,
that.
I will do some foreshadowing. and maybe we can talk about that after the show because I
That'd be cool.
love the. I've got the Atlanta UFO conference, the World UFO conference, and the Flying Saucer Comic Con, which is, believe it or not, going to be in Niagara Falls, Canada. I mean, what
That's cool.
we're going international, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So I'll hit you up about that after the show. But yeah,
Alrighty.
conferences and getting people involved in the paranormal to whatever extent it is, that is some of the most engaging entertainment that I know of, and people love it. They really do. So
Mhm.
we'll talk about that for sure. Now, I'd like to ask you. We talked about um, a couple of stories that you told the last time you were here, and they are absolutely engaging and wonderful. So tell everybody, because we've got a whole new audience now that we're on YouTube and now that we're on iHeartRadio, and a lot of different people are with us now. And so tell us a couple of stories. Pick one out and tell us about it. Maybe don't quite get those two for now because they're two of my favorite paranormal stories in the world. But go ahead and tell us some things that have happened when you've done old fashioned ghost hunting at the Hanover Tavern.
Oh gosh. There is a lot. Um, and of course, as soon as you say that, the one that we talked about, actually, both that we talked about are two very prominent and exciting experiences. However, I'll go a little bit further back in time, and I'll share one of the very first experiences that we had at the tavern, and some of the historical context around that. That to me was, as an investigator, as somebody that's looking and digging through history, it was really exciting to find this.
Now I'm going to
Um,
stop you because I want you to tell everybody you are part of a paranormal research group that
yes.
does this kind of thing, right? Tell us just briefly a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm one of the founders and the director of a team called Transcend Paranormal. We operate in and out of really Central Virginia, and we're about 30 members strong. So it's a big team when you kind of compare and contrast amongst other teams. Not that many are 30 people, and I like to share that because I'm very proud of my team. I love my team, and it's a lot of fun. We get along very well, and we work together so seamlessly. It's phenomenal. But what we do is we partner with different historical locations, and we not only investigate them and try to provide context for the things that are occurring there, but we also fundraise for these different locations. And so that might mean that we're hosting public paranormal investigations. We host paranormal conferences. Um, we host lectures, presentations, tours, you name it. And over the years, we've raised somewhere north of 300 so thousand dollars for these different historical properties, and that's here in Virginia, a couple that are outside of Virginia, and that also includes some, excuse me, nonprofits and charities that we've worked with. We like to fundraise for Scares That Cares, which is a phenomenal organization that
Oh
help.
yeah, that is a
They're great.
huge that's a huge event up in Richmond, and we certainly support that because they do a lot of great things and they donate
Mhm.
money, and it's wonderful what they do.
Yep. They donate to 3 to 4 different families a year that have one with a child with a terminal illness, one with family that's got a burn victim, one that has breast cancer, and then they'll sponsor another family from that. So we try to do as much fundraising and helping and giving back to the community as possible. I'm also part of two different shows. I am the historian and an investigator on the show, The Ghost Finders, which is on Paraflix. You can also find it on Amazon Prime and the Spirit Channel on Roku devices, as well as on the internet. And I'm also one of the co-hosts, along with my buddy Chris Vaughn. We have our own, kind of series on YouTube called Eerie Encounters, and we haven't posted too much content from that recently. Kind of got busy, but I have actually been working, and that's my own editing, and my own fun, and get to teach myself how to do things. So that'll hopefully be kicking back up here soon. So do a lot of different things, have a lot of different hats that I wear.
Right, I know all about hats. I have a whole rack full of hats right over there. I know what you mean. Well, that's great. All right, tell us a story, and we want to get into some comments and some questions because I'll tell you what, I love paranormal stories,
Mhm.
especially when they're true.
So one of my it wasn't the first experience that brought us there, and that is its own story and own experience in and of itself. But we got a call one day, and keep in mind, I had for a chunk of my childhood grown up around the tavern, and the tavern was always like the spooky building. Everybody's got one in town where you're like, yeah, that's the haunted building. The tavern was that for me, and for a lot of my peers at the time. And so when I received a phone call like, hey, you know, this is, David Deal, the executive director at the tavern. We'd love for your team to come out and investigate. We've got some things going on. I'm like, done. I'm there. And so one of the very first things that we did, we had a full day, an absolutely full day when we went up to the tavern, and we didn't investigate. We sat down, and I had one of my very old cameras, and I don't even know where that camera is anymore. But we had audio recorder as a camera, and pen and paper, and we had interviews. Anybody that had an experience there, anybody that wanted to come and share a story from the community, that was from the tavern, something that stemmed from the tavern that they thought was memorable and they wanted to share with us. We interviewed guests, we interviewed um, staff members, volunteers, former staff members, anybody and everybody that wanted to come up and share something with us. And I very specifically remember this older woman coming in, and she sat down and she started sharing these stories, and she had a number of experiences on the property that we've actually also experienced. However, one of these always stuck out, and she shared about this experience she had, where she, as a young kid, she lived at the tavern when she was a young kid. She was in bed one evening, um, asleep. She wakes up very early, very very early in the morning, to the sound of the dog barking, and she hears the dog barking. The next thing she knows, her parents are coming into the bedroom saying, "Hey, you got to get up. We got to get out of the house. That the tavern's caught fire." And so she remembers kind of being, shuffled out of the house very quickly, out of the tavern, down the stairs, outside, and she remembers that by the time the firefighters had gotten to the tavern, the fire was out. The fire had put itself out.
That
And
was great.
yeah, it was interesting in and of itself. And so we asked her, like, okay, well, do you remember what room that was? And of course, we were sitting, right there, and she's like, well, it was this room right here. Um and so we're like, okay, well, that's something that when we go to investigate, we're gonna inquire about. And so the very first investigation that we did at the tavern, we made it a point to go into this room, the Washington room, and we walk in there and we say, "Hey, um, does any you know does anybody know anything about a fire in this room?" And let me preface this by saying that there is no signs of a fire anywhere in the building. There's no burnt or charred wood. There's nothing that would signify or point towards there ever being a fire anywhere in the tavern at all. And we also didn't, I asked David, and we could not find anything. So I asked this question during, the very first EVP session in this room. And when we go back and listen to the recording, we hear a male reply, "It was me." And I'm like, okay, well, now, not only do we have this story of somebody that lived here, we also have an EVP of somebody saying that they had some connection to this fire. And so we start digging and digging and digging and digging and digging, and we're looking in journals and we're asking people, we're talking to other folks, we're trying to find anything that we can that we could say, oh, yep, there was a fire here in the building. It wasn't for, gosh, almost 2 years. We had gotten a new education director, and he just so happened to find a copy of a diary from the folks that lived there during the Barksdale theater period. And in there, if he was skimming this book, I promise you he would have never found it. But in this book, in the journal, there's just a few lines. Early this morning, the uh, window AC unit caught the curtains on fire in such and such room, which was the Washington room. By the time that the firemen got here, the fire had burnt up the curtains and nothing else. And there was smoking gun. We had it. There was a fire. She remembered it correctly as a child. We were able to point that, yep, there was an electrical fire. It caught some curtains on fire because some electrician or somebody that installed this window AC unit in this room improperly installed it. It ended up catching the curtains on fire, and just the curtains, nothing else. Rest of the property was fine. But to have that experience of, like, wow, like we've got a first-hand account, then we have an EVP, something, by all accounts paranormal, saying, yeah, yeah, there was a fire here. That was me. Um, and then to find another reference to it, some sort of documentation, it was awesome. It was awesome just to be able to find that validation that what we were told, what we picked up, all of this is true. This actually did happen. And
Well,
and it was awesome.
I'm certain it is. Dr. Trey, you got any questions or comments for Steve? That's a pretty cool story.
I've got a few. First, I wanted to know that is the 1733 tavern encased in the 1791 structure?
It is not. We
Yeah.
don't actually know where the original very first tavern was. We know that it didn't burn down because there was no insurance claims on it. We know that nothing really happened to it, other than we think that it was about 100 years old. They probably took what they could out of that structure, out of that building, and probably utilized it for a portion of the tavern. Now we
Right.
know that a lot of the tavern has, you can look in very, very certain places, very specifically, you can see the Roman numerals etched into the wood still, where they would have shipped the pieces in and they would have installed them as as they were building it. So I don't think that a whole lot of it probably made it over, but I would presume a portion of it probably did, and then they probably just let the rest rot and fall into the ground, unfortunately.
Right. And when the Barksdale troupe was there, did they have any stories that they related to you that would touch on the paranormal?
Yes, and so that was actually that woman that I was talking about. She was one of the children that was there during the Barksdale theater period. Her parents were actors, and so um, typically, the tavern it's got a basement, or a first floor as we call it, the second floor, which is the main floor, and then the third floor, which is where the actors and actresses and their family would have stayed. They would have slept there. That was their sleeping quarters. The main floor was divided into two sections. One was their dining space for the dinner and a show experience, and the other half was like their family room, their space for everybody that was living there to have a communal spot. And then the basement had the theater in it. And so yeah, we've had a few folks share stories about. So that woman, first off, shared that, which we were able to denote as something paranormal, well, at least the EVP. But she also recollected that she would often wake up in her bedroom, and see a man in a brown suit, holding a big book that she could only surmise was a giant Bible, like one of those big Bibles. And so she said that she would often wake up and see this man standing at the foot of her bed. And he would stand there for a couple minutes, and then if she tried to say anything, he would disappear. She also recollected smelling the scent of perfumes and cigars directly outside of her room, which we actually still smell today. Now, we don't allow any open flames in the tavern. Definitely no smoking. It is an old building. It is a tinder box. That place would go up like a flame. If it would caught fire, it would go up in a second.
Right.
But she's had that experience. One of the others, and one of the very first reasons that we got into investigating the tavern, was some other folks that recounted seeing this woman in a black gown making her way throughout the building. And there is a whole story to that as well. And I can share that if you guys want. But um, what brought us there was this woman, and our executive director having an experience where his family saw her, um, and then as we started uncovering more and more, we found out that this was not a one-time thing, that people years and generations have seen this woman uh, making her way through the tavern. And to me, that was really unique to find out that nope, it's not just, this wasn't a single occurrence. I've
You're
had
talking about
so many
the
people.
lady. You're talking about the lady in the black gown.
Yes, so
Oh,
many people have experienced her over the times.
definitely. Let's start with the lady in the black gown. This sounds wonderful. And then I'll tell you about the lady in the brown gown.
Everybody's got something in some color. Trey, did you have any
Sure
other
does.
questions? I know you said you had a couple.
Well, the other one is does the tavern serve alcoholic beverages?
Yes, Tavern does have a full restaurant and bar in there, so we do have an ABC license and managers and all that sort of stuff. So we do serve it. It's not like a rowdy bar or anything like that. We try to keep it, fairly nice and family friendly. The whole intent is to be, a place for the community to come, and to meet and be together. So we don't, we're not something like that stays open late or anything like that. We typically take last reservations at like 8 o'clock or so. So that can kind of give you an idea that we don't have like, we're not the open till 2 a.m. Everybody's going there and getting drunk or anything like that. But we do have, we have a full restaurant bar. Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking if you have a UFO watch party, you might have a higher chance of getting some sightings if you have an open bar that evening.
Right. We can have spirits and aliens.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, I tell you what, if I bring Les and Claudette up there, they don't have anything to do with drinking. It's amazing what they can do, and that's what
yeah.
I'll talk to you about. But
Yeah.
yeah, there are hot. I would call that a super hot spot, wouldn't you, Steve?
Uh, the tavern, I mean, it stays pretty active. I mean, there are a couple evenings where I've been in there and there's not a whole lot going on. But I can also say that's for some of the big locations that I've been to, that I've kind of um, you know, found a place in my heart that I keep going back to. And St. Albans, for example, sanatorium in Radford, Virginia, one of my favorite spots on the East Coast. uh, I've had some of the most interesting experiences that I've had while investigating there on the property, um, and in the building. And sometimes we go in, we get activity. Sometimes you go in there and you could hear a pin drop for the entire evening. And that's how it is sometimes.
I know all about that. When I go to Lakemont, Georgia, either I will see a Bigfoot or it is dead quiet and there's nothing happening. So it just kind of depends on how it is that day. Wouldn't you agree?
It's like fishing.
Okay. All right. That it, Dr. Trey, because I'm ready to get to the lady in the black negligee. That sounds phenomenal.
I don't know if I remember that one. I do remember, was it a child that walked through an upstairs passageway that you experienced?
I have seen a full body apparition upstairs in one of the top floors. I don't know that if it was a child or not. other folks have seen a younger little girl up there, but I have not. You
Maybe,
know,
maybe I don't. Maybe not remembering the child part. Maybe it was um, the apparition that you saw, but it
yeah,
crossed. Can't remember between rooms or through a hallway or walk
yes,
to the
yep,
end,
yep.
walk through a wall or something like
It
that.
was at the end of a hallway, and we watched it kind of. It was at a, like it's like a T.
Right,
This hallway, you go down the hallway, and then there's another. It stops, and there's a
right,
hallway that goes either side.
right.
And I was actually giving a tour, and during that tour, watched something just kind of walk right on past,
That's what I remember.
and
That's
it was a pretty
What
fun
can
time.
what can you say? I mean, that's great.
So, but yeah, so our lady in black, she was really ultimately the driver of us coming to investigate the tavern. Um, we when I first got the call to uh, come out to the tavern and investigate, it was because our executive director David, his wife and daughter had an experience with the lady in black. It was during a what we call a tavern tea, and we host different fundraisers at the event or at the tavern. We have paranormal investigations, we have different teas, themed teas. Like they're getting ready for a Bridgerton one right now. But it was during one of those teas that um, his wife was standing there greeting women as they came in for the tea, and she felt somebody grab her shoulder. And so she turned around, and there was nobody there. The closest person was her daughter Katie, who was sitting on a step leading towards one of the other portions of the building. And so she kind of brushed it off, didn't think too much of it, and she said, "Hey, Katie, we need some more tea. Can you please get up and go grab some more?" And she says, "Yeah, yeah, sure." So Katie stands up and she turns around and she makes her way through what we call the parlor room. And the parlor is part of the home portion of the building. So remember, I was saying that there's a home portion and there's a tavern portion. The home portion is the original or the oldest portion of the building that dates back to 1791. And as she started to make her way into the parlor, she realized that she was not alone. There was another woman in there in a black morning gown, and this woman was heading essentially in the same direction as Katie. Katie was walking in, and she was already in the middle of the room, making her way towards the other side of the room. There's a threshold that goes into the rest of the house there. And Katie just kind of kept walking, and this woman in this black gown stops. So Katie stops. The woman turns around. She makes direct eye contact with Katie. She smiles at her, turns back around, and as she's walking through the threshold to go into the main entrance or lobby, I guess, of the house, she disappears. And of course, that freaked Katie out pretty properly. Um, and that was it. That was the call. That was why we were brought to the tavern. Is she, you know, definitely saw this what looked to be real person in this room walking with her, and then all of a sudden gone, disappeared. And so what was really cool is we started digging into that and we started understanding, asking why. Because having a paranormal experience is great and all, but without context, you can't really build like the why. Like, why did that happen? Why was that right there? Why wasn't that on the second floor? Why wasn't that in the basement? Why wasn't that in another portion of the house? Why did it happen at all? Right. And so we kind of take some clues based off of the experience in and of itself. And so the very first is the fact that she's in a black morning gown, right? The black morning gowns were most popular during the Victorian era. So right after the Civil War. And she was wearing a black morning gown. So effectively, this woman was in mourning, right? And we know that in Victorian era times there were kind of a set practice, right? There were rules around mourning. for men, women, everybody, right? If your significant other passed away, well, you had to mourn for a set period of time because that was what was proper. If your son or daughter passed away, or your father or your mother or a sibling, you had different increments of time that you were expected to mourn.
So you had
And
different conduct.
yes, and for women, it tended to be a little bit longer than everybody else, and that's just how it was at that time. Um, the other interesting piece was where she was seen. She was seen in the parlor. And the interesting thing about that is, again, we're in the home portion of the building. The home portion of the tavern was for, and especially the parlor, highly esteemed guests, friends, and family. It was not for your run of the mill folks that were traveling down the stagecoach road, making their way either to Richmond or to, going the other way towards Baltimore or Washington, D.C., of which we had Edgar Allan Poe stop by a few times. Um, but it wasn't for just normal folks. And so we know that this woman must have been tied to the Tavern family in some form or manner. So we start digging. Okay, well we've got an era, right? Luckily she was in a morning gown, so it's got that big skirt and everything, and we know roughly what that time period's like. We also know that she's seen in the home portion of the building. She's seen in the parlor, and one other interesting thing about the parlor is the parlor was a almost a the beating heart of the home for that time period, right? That's where all of your family functions occurred, not just you know if you had big gatherings or celebrations, but also death, right? And that's where the term funeral parlor comes into play. Funeral parlors were when you finally took the act of a wake and put them into their own separate buildings, right? And so during this time period, if somebody, a family member passed away, they would be laid out in the parlor, right? The funeral parlor, the parlor, and you would have a wake that would consist of a number of days. And the reason for that was very simply to make sure that the deceased were actually deceased. And that's why it's called a wake, because somebody was sitting there to make sure that the dead didn't wake, right? Because live burials were a thing, right? They were a very scary thing back then.
They would- they
Uh,
they truly would happen.
oh, they would, yeah, 100%. And so we know that this was the room that if a family member would have passed away, this is where somebody would have been, right? This is where this family member would have been. So we start taking all these pieces. We've got a timeline. We understand that okay, it's probably towards the end or right around the Civil War, maybe a little bit after, somewhere in there. We know that it's a family member, it's somebody that's related to the tavern owners, and we start looking. At that point in time, we know that the tavern owners had two sons and two daughters. Both sons went off to war and came back alive. Both daughters stayed home from war, obviously, and both passed away. Both passed away there at the tavern, one of which left two children for the tavern owners, their grandparents, to end up eventually taking care of. So we know now that not only do we have a tavern owner uh, and his wife experiencing a loss, not one, but two losses, both of their daughters passing away, um, right around the same time period that this dress would have been worn. Everything lines up. We know that both of them died from sickness because there was an outbreak of diphtheria, yellow fever, and typhoid in that area at that time. Um, but we have all of the information now. Can I say without guarantee, with full certainty and guarantee that this is exactly who it is? We know it is. No, I can't. But piecing together all of these parts of this puzzle, right? She's predominantly seen, and this is the fun part. That's not the first experience for Our Lady in Black. She is seen uh, throughout time. Like folks from the Barksdale Theater period era, the 1950s, recall seeing her walking through the building, predominantly in the home portion of the building. People in the 70s and the 80s remember seeing her. People in the 90s remember seeing her. We've had recent sightings of her. Um, all of these folks have seen this same woman, not necessarily in the same spot in the parlor, but usually in the parlor, that main hallway. She might be right on the veranda, which would have originally been the front porch of the house. Um, but she's predominantly seen in this area of the building. And that makes sense, right? Because that was her home. That's where she would be. Um, as well as the fact that both of her daughters passed away. She would have been in a state of mourning. This is exactly what she would have worn. And this is exactly where she would have done that mourning, that wake. So it was one of the coolest things to come in and hear about this experience and dig into the history and realize, oh wow, like this all lines up. This makes sense. Um, the interesting thing is it took us a very not a long time to get there, but a long time to finally, what we believe, come in contact with her. Um, I've been investigating the tavern for, gosh, maybe 12 years or so at this point, I think. And it took almost 10 years before we finally heard from this woman. And in EVP, she does confirm that, yeah, that's me. But that's not how she wants to be remembered, because that was a small portion of her life, and she doesn't like that gown. Now, I don't know why a lot of times she's presented herself, or if that was even a choice, because I don't know the rules or regulations here. But for whatever reason, most folks see her in this black morning gown in that portion of the tavern. Now, does that mean that she's bound to wear that? I have no idea. I just know that for whatever reason, a lot of people see her that way. And then when we had an EVP session and we finally, you know, recorded something that contextually fit with her because we were asking questions specifically towards her, she mentioned that that's not how she wanted to be remembered. So it was really interesting. It's one of the coolest experiences I've had, just being able to piece all these things together through time.
Was she able to identify who she was?
She, I never give out names, just FYI, just out of
No, no. I'm
a respect thing for the family. But yes,
did,
we
did she
did ask if
identify
she could tell
as
her name, and she gave us her nickname.
did she identify herself as the mother of these two girls that died? Was she able to do that?
Yes, yeah, she said that those were her daughters, and she also had a nickname that she went by, and she gave us that nickname.
Uh-huh.
So it was pretty cool.
You
I
know,
wonder
Steve,
wonder how she,
I'm gonna jump in and say, and Trey, I'll let you come back. But I've got a book here, A History of Chowan College. Chowan College is a very small college on the eastern shore of North Carolina.
Hmm.
And they had a lady called the Brown Lady. And the Brown Lady, and I've got articles that Chowan College got to me. It was amazing. We went up there. I went up there with the head of the Kentucky Ghost Hunters organization, Spade, and everything was fine. We were walking into the administrative offices of this very small college, and then all of a sudden, we all saw the brown lady. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it when you see an apparition. And I mean, it was just amazing. I'm sorry, Trey. I did since I broke away and wanted to get this because we are going back up there to Chowan College. Maybe we'll go up there on the way up to your event, Steve,
That'd be cool.
on the 31st of January and the 1st of
Hmm.
February this next year. But I definitely want to get back up there. And it was just amazing when you're up there and you see something, and
Yep.
it's a little frightening. I'm sorry. All right, Trey, go back. I
well,
just wanted to mention that.
I'll come back to that in a second. But John, when you saw the woman in brown, were you with a group of people, and did they all see the same thing?
Yes, I was with the provost, the head academic officer, his secretary, Kevin, the head of Spade, and myself. And we saw something that looked like kind of a shadow walk by the door. And we just all looked at each other. It was like, oh my goodness. Yeah, we all four of us saw the same thing.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, now, Steve, with the woman who said she did not want to be remembered that way, did she say how she'd like to be remembered?
Um, Not necessarily, just that this is a little bit of trying to I guess build some context around it, but um she was in a state of mourning, sadness, right? And I don't think that's how she wanted to be portrayed. If you and we do have a diary from the tavern from that time period, and it does talk about her. And she was a very boisterous woman. At the time period, this was during the Civil War, and the tavern owners, despite being in Hanover, Virginia, which is minutes away from Richmond, which was the capital of the Confederacy. The tavern owners were Union sympathists, and so there's a number of stories in this diary, and it's the diary of Margaret White. She was um, a refugee from the Civil War, and she stayed there at the tavern during intermittently through the war, but wrote a diary about her experiences, and those were predominantly at the tavern. Um, but she recounts her as being a very big personality, and um, she would never shy away from a dime. If somebody was coming down the road and it was a bunch of Confederate soldiers and they were looking for a place to stay, her husband was like, "Well, I don't know about this. We're more leaning towards the Union," and she's like, "I don't care. We need money. They're going to come and stay. They're going to pay us." And so there's stories about this where you know soldiers would show up in front of the tavern, and she would yell at her husband to stay upstairs because she didn't want him getting into a quarrel because they needed folks to stay so they could make some money.
Right.
So she had a very big personality, and I mean, coming from somebody that's also slightly loud, I feel like that is probably what she's probably aiming for. She wants to be remembered for her true self, not this very specific time, moment in time that is not a defining piece of her. It's a part, and yes, I'm sure she mourned. I mean, who wouldn't? The loss of your children. Um, but I don't. I think that the sentiment is more that she had a big portion. She had a very big role to play at the tavern. She was a very important figure, and I think that to me is probably more so how she'd want to be remembered. And so that's kind of how that's how we share her history today.
I was in New Orleans a few weeks ago, and there was a discussion on how you want people to remember you after you've passed.
Yep.
One little lady said that when people were at her wake, she wanted them to say, "Oh, she was a kind woman, just a kind woman." And the other little lady said, "Oh, I just want to be remembered as such a good cook. Oh, she could really cook." Somebody said, "Boudreaux, what do you want them to say when they're looking at you in the coffin?" Boudreaux thought about it a while and he said, "I think I'd like them to say, 'Hey, isn't that Boudreaux moving in there?'" That's my Boudreaux joke for the evening.
I
Oh,
like
that's
that.
great. All
I
right,
like
Trey.
that. That's a good one. I'm
Trey,
gonna have to steal that.
I've got a quick question for you
Yeah,
because you are our Revolutionary War guy.
right.
Approximately when would the Revolutionary War have been the thing up in Richmond? What time period?
Well, I know before at one point the British were trying to chase down the governor, who was Jefferson, and he ended up having to hightail it off to the Lynchburg area where Poplar Forest was, and that's before he built Poplar Forest. He owned the land, so Poplar Forest was built much later, but that went on fairly early during the war. So certainly the 1770s. By the 1780s, the war had come further south.
So we actually, fun fact, hopefully everybody here knows Patrick Henry, right?
Sure.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
Patrick Henry married Sarah Shelton,
Yes.
and the Shelton family owned and operated the tavern for a period of time. It
Mm,
was known as the E. Shelton Inn. And when Patrick and Sarah married, uh, they ultimately ended up living at the tavern for a small period of time. Granted, this would have been the original tavern, right? 1760s or so thereabout, not the new tavern.
right.
That's not to say that Patrick probably did see the new tavern, but it was out of his hands at that point, right? However, it was at the tavern, and we still claim this because it was still the Hanover Tavern, just the one-story building versus the new tavern. It is at the tavern that Patrick Henry found his love for law. He actually was a barback at the tavern for a period of time, and right across the street from the tavern, and a lot of uh, taverns were scattered all about the Stagecoach Road, but this tavern in particular, the Hanover Tavern, sits across the street from the Hanover Courthouse. And the courthouse, having circuit court through, once a month or so, uh, the tavern would host all of those folks that came into town, right? And so Patrick became so enamored and interested with law, just listening to all of the folks from Circuit Court coming through, that he ended up pursuing it himself. And it's at St. John's Church in downtown Richmond that he gave his impassioned "Give me liberty, give me death." However, before that, it was at the Hanover courthouse that he argued the Parsons cause, which, if you head all the way back to fourth grade, uh, goodbye, Johnny Phil. The uh, Parsons cause is taxation without representation, right?
Right.
And Patrick at that time was living at a house called Scotchtown, which is right here, on the other side of Ashland, which is in Hanover County. And we've investigated Scotchtown as well. We've had the opportunity to, and it's phenomenal, beautiful location. Um, but Sarah had passed away not long before. So you've got this probably tired, exhausted, anxiety, all of the things that go with the loss of losing a loved one. And now he's got to go and argue this case, right? The colonists are being taxed for essentially a year of drought, and there was nothing going in, money wise. And so he gets in there, and he learned a lot of this from I believe it was, gosh, I think it was Davies. I can't remember, but uh, um, I'm gonna have to look that up. But yeah, Samuel Davies, who started some of the first reading houses in America. Um, Patrick's mom would take him up there and listen to Samuel Davies, his sermons, and so he learned that fiery kind of attitude, and passion from Samuel Davies when he started practicing law. So he gets in there, and it just so happens to be that this case, the Parsons cause case, uh, is the first in all of the colonies, and his argument towards that was a waterfall effect. It basically, because of what he set forth and how he was so passionate and argued this case, and favor, ruled towards the colony as opposed to the parliament, uh, that every other court case, same way. And so in effect, that was one of the biggest sparks of the American Revolution, occurring literally across the street from the tavern.
In November 5th, 1774, uh, a Colonel Drayton, he was Justice Drayton of Drayton Hall in Charleston, came to Camden, talked to the circuit court. Well, he talked to the grand jury. And juries in the 18th century weren't just dealing with criminal cases, they dealt with civil cases, they dealt with disputes, they dealt with complaints. And he delivered an impassioned speech again on taxation without representation in not so many
Mhm.
words, but that was in 1774, and the jury then published a document that they wanted published in the Charleston newspaper that would serve the state of South Carolina at the time, and those were called the Camden Resolves, and
Mhm.
one of them was specifically to point out that taxation without representation went against the Constitution, that as Englishmen they had a right to.
Yep.
So, do you know what date Patrick Henry's discourse was on that one? Was it
Gosh, I don't know off the top of my head.
what was it? What is it called? The
Parsons Cause. Yeah,
Parsons Clause. I'll look it up.
I'll tell you.
See,
I think it was a little bit later. Um, 1768 was a poor harvest. 1762, uh, something had sued behalf of all the ministers. Patrick Henry was unknown. Henry argued. I think it was before December 12th, 1763, because it was written about in a letter. Um,
so it
so
pre what went on in Camden for 10 years. So maybe that was maybe that message was certainly propagated throughout the colonies. I mean, Camden was the first place in South Carolina to write what we would term a mini Declaration of Independence on that one object, but
mhm.
certainly had been circulating the colonies for a while.
Yep. But it's cool stuff. I love it. I love the history behind all of it. Because not only did we have Patrick Henry there, George Washington came through and stayed twice at the tavern. He wrote about it in his diary. We know that Marquis de Lafayette had been through there. Um, we have so many different historical figures that have graced the halls of the tavern. And it's hard to imagine, walking through that building that not necessarily it wasn't necessarily that one, but the Hanover Tavern in and of itself, right? The whole purpose of it, and knowing that this is where some of these figures would have been right here on
Right,
these grounds is
right.
just phenomenal.
If only those walls could talk, and
I
actually
know, right?
through your research, you're getting some of those walls to talk. Cool.
I need them to talk more as much as
Right.
possible.
And I will say that that little episode we just had, for some reason, my cell phone, which is my camera, jumped out of its holder. I don't know what happened, but there must be somebody around here.
They
And
love
here we
history too.
go. Pardon?
They love history too. We got all
Well, they
excited.
do. There's no telling who it is. I do have a roommate. He's the gentleman whose condo I bought, and I try to take care of some of his things when I get them in the mail. And I do hear him banging around in the kitchen. And so, yes, I don't know what you guys saw, but the phone exploded out of the holder. And I mean, I don't know what was going on. So anyway, yes, ScaryCast is certainly the venue for all the haunted stuff, at least on the East Coast, at least where we are. And so, thanks for being part of it. Now, please continue, gentlemen.
Did you have another question, Trey? I didn't want to.
How about that one story where you actually witnessed it?
Yeah. So I've had a lot of experiences at the tavern, but one of the most interesting is the story that I shared a while ago with you guys. But um, it was one of the very few times that I've seen a full body something apparition something at the tavern. And again, I don't want to go out there and say like the tavern is one of the most active places you'll ever be, because it's not. It's just we have some activity, and we've never had anything negative, which is really nice. So knock on wood. Um, but when we do, it's pretty unique and it's really cool. And so one of the experiences that I had was actually while I was giving a ghost tour at the tavern, and so we do those once a month. And it was with actually some friends of mine. They bought some tickets and came up, and so I was like, all right, well, let's go on this tour, and I'll tell you about the tavern. And we tried to uh, mix the paranormal with history, so that way people learn something, as opposed to just hearing creepy stories. You learn something. You learn some historical context about the building, about our country, so on and so forth. And so we typically start outside and then make our way into the theater and on the first floor. We go upstairs, we check out some of the historic rooms. And then ultimately we go up to the second floor, and majorly those spaces are offices now. We have our restaurant staff office up there, our foundation. We've got two full-time employees that constitute our foundation, and they have offices. And so we generally don't go into those rooms just because there's paperwork, there's that's their belongings, that's their stuff, and I wouldn't want somebody ruffling around in my stuff, and so we respect that. And so we do take them into this one room we call the bride's room, and that is where, aptly named, brides, when they come and have weddings at the tavern, get ready. As you make your way out of the bride's room, you come around and kind of do a U-turn, and you are face to face with this long hallway. And what's really cool about this long hallway was it wasn't originally there. Um, Originally, these were two separate buildings, and so they were built as such. And when the building was connected, originally it was just kind of this outside piece, and then they eventually built it into be an enclosed space to turn it into one building. But they never made a hallway to connect to the two sides of the building. So if you were in the home portion of the building and you wanted to go to the tavern portion on the second floor, you had to make your way downstairs, in the home, out the side door, and into the tavern, and then make your way up that set of stairs. So it was a little bit of a process. When they came through and started making boutique hotels, or turn it into a boutique hotel, they ended up shortening some of the rooms, and so the rooms were front of the house to back of the house. They were massive, massive spaces, and so they took the front of the house and they pretty much moved the walls in a little bit, and then created a hallway all the way down. I call it the shining hallway because it's typically pretty dark, and the only thing that illuminates it at night is an exit light that's at the far end, and it lights up red, and so the whole hallway lights up red, and it's kind of creepy, and kind of fun. So, shining hallway, and we're making our way down this hallway, and we get down towards the end. And at the very end, you kind of come to a T, right? This long hallway ends. If you took a left, you'd go into some of the office spaces. If you took a right, you could kind of wind your way to a separate set of stairs that go downstairs. As I was standing there, at the conjunction of this T, I was sharing the story of the young girl that we talked about that um, had experiences when she was in her bedroom, and I start the story about the fire there, and I finish it in the Washington room, which is directly below. And so, uh, I'm kind of sharing these stories, and all of a sudden, the guests, my friends, are like staring at me like crazy, crazy eyes. I'm like, You guys are right." And they're like, "We just saw something." And I'm like, "Well, what did you see?" And they're like, "Well, we just saw a black mass, about maybe 3 feet tall, like half, I'm 5'7", so it was about half of me, whatever." And they're like, "We just watched it walk from one side of the hallway behind you to the other side." And so I kind of step back and I'm like, looking. I don't see anything. I don't see anybody. And there was no sound behind me. Like I would have noticed it. We've got original flooring. It creaks. It makes noise when you walk. Um, So I'm like, okay, well, whatever. Let's just continue with the story. So I continue to talk about the this girl and her experiences, and maybe a minute or so passes, and then they're like, "Oh my gosh!" And I'm like, "What?" And they're like, "It happened again." And this time it went from, it went one way one time, and then the second time it came from that direction and went back behind me. And same, they're like, it was the same figure, same black shadowy, mass that just literally just walked behind you. It looked like, just a blackout, cutout version of a person.
And it was moving
Um,
same direction both times.
it moved the opposite, as if it
Uh,
walked behind
yeah,
me, going from left to right,
yeah,
and then I guess it finished whatever it was doing over there, and then it went from right to left.
right.
Went back from where it came. And so I was like, you know what? Listen, I'm like, this is one of your first times in this building. I have been investigating in here for like, 8 years now, and I'm like, why are you guys getting to see this and I have not? So I'm like, you know what? Come into the hallway. Let's switch places. So so I make them come into the T with me down that short hall. Um, and we're standing there, and they're standing, right at that conjunction where I was, and I'm kind of standing back towards where this girl's room used to be. And I continue the story, and a minute or two passes, and then I see something. It wasn't a black mass, it was the opposite. It was a white figure, same height that they were describing. And it all of a sudden just appeared right behind Sheena, right behind my friend. And I'm standing there telling the story, and all of a sudden I just see this white figure all of a sudden appear, and it's right there, and then it walks behind her, and then darts down the hallway, the long hallway. And I'm like, "Oh my god." Like, I did not expect it. I had to stop. I walked around them to see, like, what was that? Is there something down there? Of course, there's nothing down there. Um, but I mean, I don't know. It blew my mind. I did not expect to see anything. But I was like, I'll be like, I was like, "Damn it all, you guys are sitting here and you've seen two things. Two times you've seen a full body apparition in this building, and I have seen nothing in all my years." I'm like, you guys got to get in this hallway with me, because I want to see it. It's my turn. And I was very lucky. And I don't know what I saw. I don't know why it was this white, you know, this white figure, literally the opposite of just pitch black of a shadow figure. And it just appeared and then made its way and darted down the hallway. And that was it. I don't have any context as to why that happened. For whatever reason, we have a lot of activity right in that little junction, right in that little area of this hallway. Um, I don't know why. We don't have any understanding why this spot of all the spots is the active spot. Now, we do know that that is part of the new quote unquote tavern. So there would have been a lot of foot traffic in that area. Um, but I mean, the entire building for most of its life had been a tavern. Lots of people have been through there. So many people have been through that building in one way or the other. So I don't
Yeah,
know why that spot is active, but for whatever reason,
you're coming
that
up to
spot.
100 years in about a decade, so
Yeah,
you know a lot of traffic. But it's these type of witnesses that are believable. Um, it's not a it's inexplicable.
yeah,
Uh,
no
you
idea.
you've described it as well as you can, considering what you saw. It wasn't like a face of someone that was mouthing words or saying or
Mhm.
moving. No, it was just something, and it had motion and it could appear and disappear, which
Yeah,
is pretty darn cool.
it was weird. And I mean, again, we've seen things down that hallway. We've experienced things in that hallway in the past, and we still to this day do. But um, I mean, that is, gosh, that is one of, if not the only time that I've seen a figure of that caliber uh, in the building anywhere.
Hmm.
What time?
Other
What
people
time
have
of
seen
day,
stuff, but
Steve? What time of day was this?
It would have been. It was in the evening because they came up and had dinner with me, and then afterwards we went on a tour. So it was probably between like 7 and 8 o'clock, if I were to guess. When we
Okay.
got back down, the restaurant had closed up, and they're like, well, you got to pay your, you got to pay your bill. And I was like, what? You think we're running away? Like, I'm
We're
like,
busy looking at a ghost. Come on.
like I'm the president here. I'm not gonna run away from my bill. And I remember going down, and they're like, "Well, you just disappeared. You guys ate, and then you disappeared." And I'm like, "Yeah, they wanted a tour. I give them a tour." So it was in the evening. It wasn't like late. Like I know a lot of people, like always like to say, "Well, 3 a.m. That's the time." Um, no, it was dinner time. It was just a time that most human beings in their circadian rhythm would have been up and moving about.
You could have told them, well, we really didn't disappear, but other things were disappearing for us.
That's right.
That's
Well,
a great.
Oh,
Steve,
Steve.
hold on one second. Is it bedtime here? All right.
it is, and I'm going to say, Steve, we have really enjoyed this, and we'd love to have you back before your February 1st event, and I'll talk to you about that because this is a lot of fun. You've got great stories from a great haunted venue, and they're wonderful. And we had some paranormal activity while you were trying to talk about it. So I wonder, I wonder if it was Patrick Henry or who was here. But
Maybe.
something happened. This phone jumped out of its holder, and there was nothing that caused that except something paranormal. So anyway,
Pretty cool.
Steve, thank you very much for being with us. It's a lot of fun. I'll get
Yeah.
up with
Thank you for
you
having me.
about the idea of doing a UFO event up there because I can just imagine what a hotbed you are near Richmond and all that stuff. And
Yeah. Well,
Dr. Trey,
maybe when you guys come up, we'll just maybe sit out and I don't drink anymore, but I might have a cigar or something. We'll hang out.
yeah, well, I'll come up there sometime this fall and see what we can do. And Dr. Trey, as usual, you were a lot of fun. You had a lot of great questions, and I want to thank everybody, Steve and Dr. Trey, for being with us on the one and only ScaryCast. It was a lot of fun, and we'll have you back, Steve. So thanks a lot.
Sounds
And I
good.
will, and I will say that you can hear me on Ground Zero. I'll be back with Clyde Love this coming Friday night, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So lots of paranormal stuff, and we'll talk to everybody sooner than later. I'll give everyone a call back. Thanks a lot.
Thank you guys.
Good night.
Good night.